This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine like hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining room can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you're visiting, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, old Florida cuisine at its best.
This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And good evening. We have returned for our first show, I guess, in 2017. I had planned last week to do the retrospective show, but the only time I could get Noe Torres on the program happened to be that day. So I put that off until this week. So I guess we're doing is not only a retrospective, but maybe a preview of things that we will do in the upcoming months here on A Different Perspective. I wanted to talk a little bit today, in the beginning at least, about the mission statement, what we do on this program. Because I think that may have been lost in translation somehow. People might not understand it. I've always felt that my job, not only as the host of this program, but as a writer as well, especially on UFOs and the paranormal, is to search out the truth. Not my truth, not your truth, not anybody's truth, but the absolute truth. And that's why we sometimes get into hard questioning of the guests when they make some outrageous statements, and I'm trying to learn exactly how they came to those conclusions and what evidence they have to back them up. So I'm searching for the truth, and sometimes it makes me come off, I guess, sounding like a debunker, someone who doesn't believe in UFOs being extraterrestrial or doesn't believe in the paranormal. I'm looking for the evidence that leads us to that, in that direction. I think of it as looking for multiple chains of evidence. And by that I mean, not only do we have witness testimony, maybe we have some instrumentality involved, such as radar, maybe we have photographs, maybe they're landing traces with materials that can be analyzed in the laboratory, that sort of thing. So we bring all of that together and we look for alternative explanations. I think that some of the great UFO sightings in the past, and here I think of Chiles Whitted, for example, and these were the two airline pilots back in 1948 who believed they'd seen a cigar-shaped craft with square windows whiz by the cockpit of their airplane. And it seemed inexplicable. I know back at the time of the sighting, the Air Force, the chief consultant, who happened to be Dr. Alan Hynek, had suggested maybe it was a meteor, a bolide. And everybody says, well, the pilots are used to seeing meteors at night and that sort of thing. But bolides are very bright meteors. And looking at YouTube, I saw what was called a meteor compilation. And what that was a whole bunch of meteor falls that had been recorded digitally, maybe some on videotape, but more so on the various digital media that are available today. Security cameras, dashboard cams, people out there with their video recorders at football games and all that sort of thing. And what struck me is as you looked at the meteor as it fell, and it was a big enough meteor and it was bright enough, it would begin to break up. And sometimes you would get the impression, if you just caught a glimpse of it, of a lighted cockpit and windows along a fuselage, because the human mind tends to group these things together, and so it was a perceived object behind it. I think Chiles Whitted, for example, got caught in that, and back in 1947, 1948, when this happened, we weren't that well aware of what was happening, what these things in the sky look like. In today's environment, of course, we have all these photographs, and I actually put some on my blog, stills from those meteor falls where you can see the idea of a lighted cockpit and square window. So I think some of the sightings like that are explained. We had another case in March, I believe, March of 1968, which was a satellite returning, and most people knew what it was, breaking up of the satellite as it re-entered the atmosphere. But a number of people reported a cigar-shaped craft with square windows on it, and this seemed to reinforce the idea that what Chiles Whitted had seen, the same sort of thing, something breaking up in the atmosphere with square windows on it. So that kind of set me to thinking about those sorts of things. But the real point here is, I think Chiles Whitted has been explained as a meteor, as a bolide. I think some other sightings like that can be explained in that fashion. So I think of my job is to kind of root out solutions for UFO sightings, if we can find some, and present cases that are, in today's environment, truly inexplicable, and see if we can't come to some consensus about what they may show, what they may be. And by doing so, I think we improve the science of ufology. We move it into a more scientific arena, something that is more important, more readily acceptable by the mainstream media and by the scientific community. And I've explored this on my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, so you can take a look at that. So when we come back in just a few seconds here, we'll be moving on into our year in review. So I will return with kind of a year in review in just a moment.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
How would you like to be able to read other people's minds? Well, the next best thing is here. When you know how to read a person's name, you know how the person thinks, feels, and behaves. Each letter in our name holds a key to unlock our true essence. Our name contains both our gifts and challenges in this lifetime. Mnemology science discovers personality secrets hidden in the placement of the letters of our names, including the first and last impression people remember about us. Sharon shows us how to interpret the arrangement of letters as outlined in her book, Know the Name, Know the Person. Sharon Lynn Wyeth created mnemology science after 18 years of research and testing her theories, and has supported thousands of people around the world in understanding themselves and others better. You'll enjoy Sharon's unique teachings as she shares her system to learn the gifts behind your given birth name. Even if you don't like your birth name, there are jewels in this book. If you're thinking of changing your name, ready to name your child, or wanting to get along better with others, this is the book for you. If you'd like to improve your relationships and change your life for the better, get the book today, Know the Name, Know the Person, or visit www.knowthename.com. That's www.knowthename.com.
Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere, Florida. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine such as hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining rooms can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you visit, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic downtown Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, old Florida cuisine at its best.
And as promised, we are now back. And I thought for this segment here, we'll take a look at the year in review. What we did in the last, actually 5 or 6 months that we've been doing this program, and what sort of information has come out. I think one of the most important topics we discussed, and we did it over a number of programs, which was the Socorro UFO landing case in New Mexico in 1964, the Lonnie Zamora case. And we had Ben Moss and Tony Angiola on the program talking about their investigation in the last 2 years of the Socorro case and what they had found. And during that conversation, they said a couple of things that I found somewhat provocative, somewhat interesting. And one was that I had always thought of the Zamora case as single witness. Lonnie Zamora saw the object, saw it land, saw the creature, saw it take off. That's it, no other witnesses. But in the discussion with them, they said that there were at least 3 other witnesses to the case, and they had called into the police station. I asked them specifically, did they check the police logs? And they said no, they hadn't done so. So I was somewhat skeptical about this. But as I was looking at the case file, there was a fellow named Richard T. Holder. He was a Army captain who had command of what they called the Stallion Station, I believe, on the White Sands Proving Ground. And if you look at a map of New Mexico, you'll see the White Sands missile range now today incorporates an awful lot of area in that section of New Mexico. So he lived in Socorro, New Mexico, because it was actually closer for him to live in Socorro to where his duty station was than for him to live in Alamogordo, which is, I guess, more information than you probably wanted. Anyhow, Captain Holder had interviewed a number of people that very night in New Mexico. That very night, he had been called out by the FBI agent who asked not to be identified or not even mentioned that he was there. But in the course of his conversation with the radio dispatchers in the Socorro police station, he learned that 3 people had called in saying they had seen this blue flame in the sky or this thing in the sky that eventually was what Lonnie Zamora saw land. So while the police didn't log these calls, didn't bother to get the names of the witnesses, which would be an incredible piece of information for us to have, Holder did in his official report that's in the Project Blue Book files mention the fact that 3 witnesses had called in seeing this object in the sky or seeing the blue flame in the sky. So that kind of corroborates what Ben and Tony were telling us about that. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. Doesn't mean it's an alien spacecraft. It just means there were other witnesses to this thing in the sky, and it was corroborated through the documentation. So that was one thing that I learned after talking with them on the program. The other thing was they were talking about what the symbol Zamora saw was. And that became kind of a point of contention with a number of people. And I think most of us who look at the Socorro case think of the symbol as being sort of an inverted V with a post or a line down from the apex of the V and this arc over that and a line across the bottom. I always think of it as the umbrella symbol. And Tony and Ben were saying that it was actually an inverted V with 3 lines through it. And when we had Ray Stanford on the program, he said the same thing. That was the exact symbol. Although earlier, and by earlier I mean like 50 years ago when he first investigated the case, he said that was the fake symbol and the umbrella symbol was the correct one. So I was looking into this, and I'm not sure how much of this minutia is interesting to people, but what I found is in the Project Blue Book files, and it's been published a number of times, is Lonnie Zamora drew the symbol for Holder, the FBI agent whose name was Burns, and for J. Allen Hynek. And he signed one of those, and it's the umbrella symbol that he signed. But he also said, and Ben and Tony brought this up, and I think Ray brought this up as well, is that as he saw the object leaving and the symbol on the object, he drew it on a scrap of paper so that he would remember exactly what it looked like. And that was before Sergeant Chavez showed up and that sort of thing. And that piece of paper, that scrap, which is again signed by Zamora, is in the Project Blue Book files, and that is the umbrella symbol. To me, that suggests that the proper symbol is the one that we've all thought it was, not the inverted V with the 3 lines through it, but the one that we've seen in the magazines and the books since that time. Now, if you go back and look at the original reports of some of this, you'll see that some of the newspapers reported the inverted V with the 3 lines through it. But Holder, I think it was, told Zamora not to reveal what the symbol was because their thinking was if somebody else came forward with a sighting and they said they'd seen the symbol and this fake symbol, this inverted V with the 3 lines through it, had been reported in the paper and that's what they had seen, then they would be able to discriminate between the real additional sightings and those that are kind of making up what they had seen. Holder told this to the Lorenzens. That would be Coral and Jim Lorenzen from the APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. And that was published in their APRO bulletin. And in the May issue of the 1964 issue, they have the inverted V, not the inverted V with the 3 lines, but the umbrella symbol in their APRO bulletin. So that to me kind of reinforces the idea that that's the proper symbol. And there's some contention, and I have discussed this since with Ben and briefly with Ray Sanford, and they're talking about how it is the inverted V with the 3 lines is the proper symbol. I think they're wrong on that point, and there's other documentation that supports that. The other thing that I thought was interesting is we had an opportunity to talk to a guy who'd been in Project Blue Book, one of the officers assigned by the Air Force to investigate UFOs. That was Carmon Marano. And we got to him through this Socorro case. But he turned out to be a really nice fella chatting about this. If you remember, this was the guy who had collected some of the materials as they were closing down Blue Book and they were going to be destroyed. Weren't classified documents. So he thought they should be preserved and took them home with him, several boxes of that stuff. And Rob Mercer, if you remember, happened to learn of that on Craigslist of all places and tracked Carmon Marano down, which I thought was an incredible piece of detective work to actually find the guy who had originally owned the boxes and chat with him. And we had a chance to chat with him as well, and we learned something about the internal workings of Project Blue Book, albeit at the very end of the project, and that may kind of color our thinking on Project Blue Book. But he said a couple of things that I found interesting. One of them was that virtually none of the cases were classified, that they or he had created a briefing book for reporters and others who came to Project Blue Book to look to see what was going on. I know of a couple of UFO researchers who had said that they had communicated with Project Blue Book back at the very end, at the end of the project, and had managed to visit Project Blue Book, which I found astonishing because it was always been the idea that the Blue Book files were classified. If you go back and you look at the documents as they appear now on the microfilms that are available to everyone through either the internet or the National Archives, you'll find very few of them are classified. There's nothing to suggest they're classified. So Marano gathered this material that was going to be destroyed and took it home with him, and it ended up in the hands of Rob Mercer, so we got to learn something about it. That was interesting, that it wasn't classified, and that he had prepared these documents for reporters when they came to talk about what was going on in the UFO investigation. The other thing about that I found extraordinary was that not only did they have this briefing book that they would show to reporters, but Marano had said that the majority of the sightings they got into their office at Project Blue Book were from the Ohio area, around Dayton Air Force Base. Back in its heyday, Blue Book had UFO officers on every on every Air Force base, but it was normally assigned as an extra duty. And anybody who's been in the service understands what that means. It's simply that you have your main function. In my case, for example, in Iraq, my main function was as an intelligence officer. I had the additional duty as a public affairs officer, simply because of my background of writing books and magazine articles and newspapers. They thought this would be a good extra duty for me to have. Normally in the military, these extra duties are assigned by someone who is either not in the meeting, so he ends up with the assignment, or he or she has said something that makes them think they have some expertise. Like, well, we got to have somebody ramrodding the painting of the buildings. And somebody says, I had my house painted once, and he gets the extra duty. He or she gets the extra duty. So the UFO officer was normally an extra duty, but their requirement was to investigate the UFOs and report these to Project Blue Book at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But according to Carmon Marano, that didn't happen toward the end. And I went back and I looked at the index. When Project Blue Book was in its heyday, they created a master index which had all 12,000 UFO sightings. And I have it broken down into two loose leaf notebooks, so I can look these things up quickly. So I went back and looked at the last few pages for the last years of Project Blue Book, and he was right. Mostly sightings from the Ohio area, especially around Dayton, where Wright-Patterson is, very little coming in from elsewhere. And I found that kind of surprising, because I would have thought that would have still been gathering the UFO sightings from everywhere, but apparently there weren't, and the problem would have been the Condon Committee. That was the University of Colorado study that was commissioned by the Air Force to investigate UFOs, or I should say allegedly investigate UFOs, because it was clear that they had a mandate from the Air Force to look at the phenomenon, determine that there was no threat to national security, that the Air Force had been doing a good job, and they should close it down, which is, of course, exactly what they did. But I was astonished to see that we had very little of sightings from other locations. And part of that could be that they just stopped reporting the sightings that had been solved, which means simply if I'm out at Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and there's a UFO sighting, and I go out and investigate it, and I come up with a solution for it, I don't even bother to report it because it's been solved. It's some mundane object, and we don't need to worry about it. There are a few unidentified sightings at the end of Project Blue Book that came from outside the Ohio area, but surprisingly, a great number of the sightings came from that area. So it kind of shows, I guess, the winding down of Blue Book in 1968, 1969, and the Condon Committee being the entity to which these reports had been made. And that was something that I found a little bit disturbing, but thinking about it, not all that surprising. So that is all sort of an outgrowth of the Socorro sighting from 1964, when we got to these other people who were kind of discussing these whole things with us on the program. And you can listen to the programs up on YouTube. You can find the links to the X Zone Radio Network, or you can take a look at my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and you can go back and you can search out these specific programs in which we discuss these specific things. And there's always additional information that I've gathered afterwards as I've kind of picked up the leads on this. So that is some of the things that we had done in the last few months on A Different Perspective. I had actually had some notes to go into a lot of other spaces, but we're running short here of time, and I wanted to do a preview of some of the things that we'd like to do we'll take a look at those things when we come back. And as I say, take a look at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com for more information. And if you're interested in the Roswell case, and we'll talk a little bit about that coming up here shortly, but if you're interested in that, take a look at Roswell in the 21st Century, which is my cold case investigation of the Roswell case. So we will return shortly with a preview of some of the things I hope to have coming in the next few months.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
While science pursues fact, magic accesses the quantum level, bridging random facts to form truth. As long as science and magic remain separate and polarized, the truth cannot be known. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. Join me on the Science of Magic radio program, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. During each episode, I'll be speaking with experienced and respected scientists and mystics. From astrologers to astronomers, from medical doctors to shaman, the scientific method to dowsing and intuition, we'll weave together information from seemingly divergent practices to promote unity and enlightenment. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, and the Science of Magic right here on the Mutual Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Gibbs A. Williams, Ph.D., is a practicing psychoanalyst, supervisor, researcher, and author in New York City. Much of his life has been dedicated to understanding nature and the uses of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. His radical and original non-Jungian, non-mystical, non-magical theory of synchronicities illuminates much of the fog surrounding this challenging and perplexing topic. His ideas and manners are fresh, presented in a style that is both entertaining and highly informative. He is also an expert on crisis intervention, specially focused on violence reduction for the police and citizens, mastering anxiety, frustration, and stress without the use of medication, and effectively preventing and treating heroin addiction. Dr. Williams can be contacted at his email address at gwwilliamsny11@aol.com or visit his website at
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
True healing must address 4 levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, for us to live joyful and productive lives. We tend to treat 3 of the 4, leaving the spiritual languishing. If you're tired of the same dysfunctional patterns cropping up in your life, Soul Balancing is for you. Trixie Phelps, owner and founder of Soul Balancing, is a naturally gifted energy healer trained in numerous esoteric forms, including shamanism. Trixie has created a powerful modality that safely and effectively clears your energetic field. A soul balancing session can remove interference, heal trauma, and restore your hope. Contact Trixie for a life-changing long-distance session today, www.soulbalancing.world.
And as promised, I am back by myself to do a reflection of the last several months on the program and to look at the what we may be doing in the future. And of course, we will continue on with UFOs in the future. I have, in fact, just heard from Colonel Charles Halt, and he of Bentwaters fame, Rendlesham Forest, and he's be coming on the program to talk about his experience and what he saw and what he did at that time. We'll have Nick Redfern coming up, and a lot of you know he's written many books on UFOs, and I think he's attempting to take the crown away from Brad Steiger and me. Brad and I often argue about who's written the most UFO books. I think it's him. He thinks it's me. But I've written 28, 29 books on UFOs, and he's written a carload of books on UFOs. We've written a lot of other books as well, but this is just the UFO stuff. And mentioning Brad Steiger sort of allows me to go to some of the things that we haven't done on the program that I would like to do. And one of the things that interested me at one point, and I say at one point, I got a call from my agent in the mid-1990s, and she wanted to know if I could do a book on near-death experiences. And I knew a little about it, very little about it. And I said, sure, because as a writer, somebody offers you an opportunity to write a book, and there's talk of money changing hands. You say, of course I can do that. In fact, that was how the Vietnam Ground Zero series came out, which was published by Harlequin, which is in Canada. I mentioned that for my good friend Rob McConnell. But she had called and said, can you write a book about Green Berets in Vietnam? And as a Vietnam veteran, I could at least write about that. And I said yes. And I'm thinking if she'd called me and said, can you write a book about nurses in hospitals? I would have said yes, because it's an opportunity to write books. Fortunately, I had a better background for the Green Berets in Vietnam than nurses in hospitals. But I digress here. She had called and asked about a book on near-death experiences. And by near-death experiences, I don't mean how the mainstream media sort of co-opted in the idea that a bullet passes close by you, you're in a car wreck that should have killed you, and that sort of thing. Near-death experiences actually refers to people who have died and come back. They've been in operating rooms, and they died on the table, and they've been resuscitated or things like that. And there's any number of these stories going around that I found a little bit interesting. So I did a lot of research into this at the University of Iowa library. I talked to a number of people who had experienced these near-death experiences. And what I got from the people that I talked to, I suppose is the most important point, is the idea that they were just now very calm. They sincerely believed that they had glimpsed what would happen after they died, had an opportunity to return to do something else, and were quite sincere in their beliefs. And I found that myself, somewhat comforting. You talk to the people of going toward the light, that sort of thing, and they're met by relatives, they're met by friends, they're met by, I guess you could say, angels, and it turns out it's not their turn, their time, so they are returned. And they have memories of what happened there. I've also read the skeptical side of the argument, and I as I said, I looked at the medical journals, I looked at the psychological journals in the various libraries at the University of Iowa, I looked at some of the popular literature and all of that sort of thing. So I'm well aware that the scientific consensus seems to be that this near-death experience is merely the brain shutting down as it loses oxygen and as the blood supply is cut off to the brain, and that makes some sense to me a little bit. But there's always this element of the scientific community demanding evidence, and all they really have is what the people have related to them about what happened after they had allegedly died. And the one person talking about how he had now had a perspective from above his body, and he's watching the surgeons try to resuscitate him after he died on the table, and that sort of thing. So, I mean, it's a very perplexing question, and I certainly don't have an answer, but I'd done a book called To Touch the Light, I think it was. And in that book, I talked about a number of people I had interviewed who had these near-death experiences and what they had experienced then. But I also talked a little bit about the idea of past life regressions. And this is more worrisome than the near-death experiences, simply because the people who are normally gathering these stories are not well-educated. Well, I shouldn't say well-educated. That's not fair. Well-versed in what they're doing. And then oftentimes they use hypnosis to gather these things. And I remember one of the practitioners of this had a subject under hypnosis and trying to pull out a past life. And the subject was saying, well, I just don't remember things. I don't remember anything. And the practitioners got frustrated and said, well, just then make it up. And this is not good. This suggests something about how these stories are gathered. But I talked to some others, and I think they're doing the best job they can. And there's some interesting stories of past lives, and you see how the idea has been attacked by the church, for example. And I'm thinking here specifically of Bridie Murphy. She was a Colorado woman who, in the 1950s, a guy was at a party. They were doing hypnosis. He had learned how to do hypnosis, and they were playing the silly games with hypnosis, which really isn't a swell idea to do. And in the course of Bridie Murphy being regressed, she began to remember a life in Ireland in the mid 19th century. And so she was talking about things that she remembered and that sort of thing. And as they did some research, they found the things she was saying matched up with historical records that they could access. And in today's world, there is a internet. The internet allows you to access so much information that it's very simple to research these things at your keyboard. You don't have to go to libraries all over the world to gather the information. You do not have to leave your house. You can do it through the internet, depending on how good you are at using that. But she didn't have that opportunity. So some of the things that she said and some of the things she talked about were astonishingly accurate. Members of the clergy and a reporter, I think for the Denver Post, got a burr under the saddle against Bridie Murphy. So they were doing everything in their power to discredit the story. And I don't think they did a good job of it. They were saying, well, she had a housekeeper who had at one point had been from Ireland. And she'd gathered some of this information from talking to her and that sort of thing. I just don't think that. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's accurate. I think it was just done to kind of do away with the Bridie Murphy story. But this kind of leads me into a second point, and it's a book that I had done. I wrote it a long time ago, and eventually it was published on Amazon as just an ebook called Conversations. And it dealt with a woman who thought she had been abducted, and she had called for help. And this was back in the mid-1990s when I was more interested in the abduction phenomena and believed that people were being abducted and that sort of thing. So I arranged with a fellow that I knew who had been trained in hypnosis, hypnotic regression techniques, and that sort of thing. And we set up for her to, or we went to her house with the idea of hypnotically regressing her, which is something that we'd done. So the idea was to learn a little bit about her abduction. The abductions were bothering her immensely. It was causing her problems with sleep. She couldn't sleep at night. She was frightened all the time and this sort of thing. And I was thinking that the least we can do is maybe we can calm her down so that she won't be quite as disturbed about what was going on. In the course of the investigation, as we're asking the questions, and we're being very careful not to lead the witness. I mean, in hypnotic regression, it's very simple to lead the witness into believing something or telling you something that's just simply not true. So we were very careful not to do that and kind of asked questions that we didn't think would be leading her. It came out that she had a past life memory that went back into the 19th century, and she was describing some of the events that took place around the Jack the Ripper and how those things were going on. She wasn't claiming to be Jack the Ripper per se, but she was claiming kind of intimate knowledge of that. And as we quizzed her about other things, it seemed that she had this horrific history in past lives of being involved in some very heinous crimes, serial type crimes. Now, what we're talking to is this woman who is probably the sweetest woman you'd ever want to meet, just kind and gentle and not a mean bone in her body. And she's telling us these horrific stories about what she had done in past lives. So in the course of doing research, we discovered that some of the things she was saying were accurate. We were able to find the stuff because we had access to the libraries. We had access to the information. I'm not sure how easy it would have been for her to access all this information given the timing of these events. We could do it more easily because we had a target we were looking for, and she's, I guess, out there kind of flailing away in the dark, so to speak. But the interesting thing about the book Conversations is we get to look at a history of serial killing, I guess, from this kind of a point of view that moves from some things done in the Middle Ages up to moving into the Black Dahlia killing in 1947. And I knew a lot about the Black Dahlia simply because it was 1947. And we're doing research into Roswell, and I'm seeing stories in the newspapers about the Black Dahlia. But what all of that suggested to me as I was doing the research was that this was the Black Dahlia was part of a number of serial crimes that the police didn't recognize as serial crimes simply because the victims were unknown, unrelated in some fashion. As we understand serial crime today, but in 1947, nobody understood what that was. So they weren't connecting these things, but I was seeing these things in the newspaper that seemed to be connected. And so we did a little bit of research into that, and all of this is outlined in the book Conversations. So that kind of intrigued me, so I put the whole thing together in a book. And again, the problem with this is we're dealing with the testimony of a single witness, the woman. She's under hypnotic regression. She's telling us the stories, and we're verifying some of the facts. Some of the things she told us we could not verify or seemed to be wrong, but it could have been a matter of perspective, if nothing else. So it was kind of an interesting book, and I was looking at that the other day, and I thought, this is kind of a fun read, even if you look at it as a work of fiction, which of course it's not meant to be, but even if you looked at it as a work of extremely interesting, if nothing else. So, that's something that I want to explore in the upcoming months, a little more on the paranormal as opposed to just UFOs, and look at some of this stuff as it's coming up. And you can see some of this, as I say, at the blog, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and you can find the book Conversations on Amazon if you're interested in taking a look at what that has to say. When we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about Roswell, and hopefully we'll be done with that topic for a long time. So stick around.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
Wouldn't you love to know the secret to everything? Well then, meet Dr. Kimberly McGeorge and her cutting-edge breakthrough knowledge that combines science with possibility. Dr. Kimberly brings real-life answers and healing to those open to alternative solutions. She teaches solution-based programs and classes that will change all areas of your life forever. Specializing in conscious creation, intuitive readings, and energy medicine, you can rapidly shift health, relationships, business, and money in abundance challenges quickly. Receive her best-selling book, Secret to Everything, at no cost by going to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone. That's right, transformation can start now. Just go to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone and receive Dr. Kimberly's book for free.
Little children aren't the only ones afraid of the dark. Millions of soldiers return from war zones with PTSD, anger, frustration, fear, and loneliness, much of which surfaces during the darkness of the night. You have the chance to change the lives of these American heroes. Songs and Stories for Soldiers.us provides free MP3 players for these men and women. With a list of 3 million songs in 16 different styles, 100,000 audiobooks, and 30,000 old-time radio programs, every veteran can find something to soothe and comfort them at no cost. All our players contain an 8-hour audio program designed to help veterans fall asleep. With 1,500 plus vets now participating, it's our goal to deliver 10,000 audio players this year. Go to our website at songsandstoriesforsoldiers.us. Help us help a veteran make it through the night.
You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
And we are back with our retrospective and our preview of upcoming shows, I guess. I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the shows we had done with Robert Schaefer, and it was from a skeptical point of view, Robert being a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic, and he wanted to chat a little bit about my book, Roswell in the 21st Century, and suddenly it blew up on the internet in the areas where I go, which is mostly UFO stuff, that I had recanted the Roswell case. In fact, Jerry Clark, you remember him, he was on our first program, had done a review of the book, and the headline in Fortean Times was Roswell Recanted. And I was thinking, well, that's a little bit overblown. But people began to talk about that, and were just very disturbed about this whole idea that I had recanted Roswell. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting here doing the Roswell case. I've been holding the door for literally decades on the case. I've been standing at the doorway trying to get to the information about Roswell. And I'd done the book, Roswell in the 21st Century, which was, the idea was to look at it as a cold case. And I think I probably mentioned this before. Look at all the evidence Look at all the evidence, not just the parts that supported my point of view or might have supported the skeptical point of view, but look at both sides of it and see if there's some common ground there. See if we can see things that may have been left out of the all the words that have been written about the Roswell case. So that's what I attempted to do in the book. I wanted to make it a dispassionate examination of the information, realizing that I came into this thing with the bias that I had believed sincerely that Roswell was the crash of an alien spacecraft. I mean, the information took us there, from Bill Brazel's discussion of what he'd seen and what his father had said, to Jesse Marcel talking about what his father had done, and other witnesses we'd talked to who had seen this sort of thing. But when we did this original research back in the early 1990s, I didn't think people would be making this stuff up. I thought that in something like this, people would tell you what they sincerely remembered. I thought we might get some embellishment, people remembering things a little bit differently, or maybe adding a little bit to what they thought, but were sincere about what they were saying. I did not expect to learn that people would make this stuff up. And I think one of the best examples is a book called Stolen Valor. And what it is a book that looked at all these guys, mostly guys, claiming Vietnam service and the horrific acts they had committed in Vietnam, which played into the media narrative of the time. And what we find is a lot of these guys were lying about it. I mean, lying about everything. I read a statistic the other day that there are 800,000 living American Vietnam veterans. I think that figure's too low. But at one point in the 1970s, there were like 2.5 million Vietnam veterans that we could document. The problem is in the 1990 census, I think it was, they had a question on the census form, are you a Vietnam veteran? Now remember, there are 2.5 million Vietnam veterans. 13 million people said yes. 11 million of those guys are lying about it. Why would you lie on a census form? The point of this is people will plug themselves into anything to get their 15 minutes of fame, or their 10 minutes in the spotlight. And money means nothing to them about that. It is something that they do. And so as I'm looking at the Roswell witnesses, I'm discovering things that are quite disturbing. Some of it is unintentional. There's a story about a guy named Neely, I think it is, or Newley, who claimed that in November of 1947, he'd seen the escape pod from the Roswell craft. And he gave this information to Don Schmidt and Tom Carey, and they reported it in his book. And he says that he was at this B-29, and he had the proper credentials, and an MP came by and threw him out of the hangar off the flight line. I'm thinking that Newley had a line badge, but the line badge didn't allow him to be in that particular hangar at that particular time, which is why he was removed. But he's described this object in the bomb bay of a B-29 as I think 13 feet long with a 5-foot bulb at one end of it, kind of tapering down. What he just and the clue here was it was a silver plate B-29. Silver plate B-29s had been modified to carry the atomic bombs. In 1947, the size and shape were classified. Newley wasn't supposed to be in that place, so he was thrown out properly. But what he described was the MK3 atomic bomb. And you can go now on the internet and type in MK3 atomic bomb, and you'll see exactly what it looks like. His description matches that. So he's telling the truth. But the researchers didn't pick up the clue, which was silver plate B-29. There's another guy named Trowbridge, and in his obituary, and I don't know why I couldn't come up with the word obituary right away, but in his obituary, he claimed, well, he didn't claim, his family claimed, that he had been the last living guy to handle the Roswell debris. He said that he had been playing bridge at the Marcel's house, and I know the Marcel's played bridge because in the 1940s, that's what you did. And I know Jesse Marcel talked about bridge games at the house and that sort of thing. I think Sheridan Cavett talked about that as well. But Trowbridge said he had been at the Marcel house playing bridge when Jesse Marcel showed up with the debris, so he got to handle it. This is absolutely preposterous. I talked to Jesse Marcel Jr., of course. He remembered his father waking him up. There was not a bridge game in progress. I talked to Jesse Marcel's widow, Vaux Marcel. She said nothing about it. Jesse Marcel, when he was interviewed by other people before he passed away in 1986, never said a word about this stupid bridge game. Yet Trowbridge has plugged himself into the Roswell case. And now the great fear is in the future, people will go back and they'll be looking at this stuff and they say, oh, this guy Trowbridge, what a wonderful witness. He handled the debris. I don't believe that story at all. So what I had done in the book was look at a lot of these stories. Some of them are not in the book because, frankly, it was long enough as it was, and trying to eliminate those that had obvious problems or point out the obvious problems to it. Bring forward information we didn't have in the early 1990s when we began the work, and look at it through the now more skeptical eyes, especially after I'd learned so much about what people would do to plug themselves into an event. And John Keel, who was a writer of UFOs and the paranormal in the 60s and 70s, had suggested in 1990, 1991 that the Roswell case could be solved by a Japanese balloon bomb. Well, this was a preposterous idea, and I'd actually researched this idea, and before he'd come up with it, I had realized that the balloon bombs didn't make any sense given all the information. It did not work. The theory simply did not work. But Keel had I wanted to say floated this trial balloon, and we shot it down. But Keel said something that has come to pass, and he had written in 1990, says, I suppose by 2000 there will be 10,000 people claiming to have some sort of intimate knowledge of the Roswell case. Well, the number isn't quite that big, but it's certainly expanded to people who have come forward and said, well, I was in Roswell, but you won't find my name in the yearbook because I was there on a classified assignment, or I was there on TDY, so you can't find me in any of the records and that sort of thing. And I just say preposterous to this. But the point of the book was to look at the Roswell case and see if we could draw any conclusions. So I don't recant anything really. What I do is modify my opinion, modify where the research takes me, which is to suggest that a case that we had once thought was so robust with so many witnesses and leads to documentation, important leads to documentation, people who might have diaries the family members kept in 1947 or documentation from the government files or photographs. There was one point where we learned of a witness, had a strange first name. They wouldn't. The person who told me about him wouldn't tell me the last name, but he allegedly had pictures taken at the crash site. But the name was strange enough. I went to the county tax assessor and I said, "Can you sort your computer by first name?" He said, "Yeah," and they did. There were three things that came up. Two of them were businesses, and the other one was an older guy's name who clearly could have been the right person. So we went and talked to him, and he had absolutely no knowledge of this. But the point is, I mean, we were doing that sort of thing, and I believed that we would come up with this sort of evidence. Unfortunately, looking at it, the information just is not as robust as we would like it to be. And we were left with, I am left with, looking at this whole thing, that we can't prove it was extraterrestrial. We can tell you what it isn't to a great degree of certainty. We can say it was not a crash of a B-29 or an aircraft or an experimental aircraft, because the Air Force looked at that and said, no, it's not that. We looked at a lot of different explanations, things off White Sands, inadvertent dropping of an atomic bomb, that sort of thing. We just couldn't come up with a good explanation. I couldn't come up with a good explanation. So the point of all of this is the Roswell book, I think, tells us something about the case, many things about the case that weren't published before. So I'm looking at it as if I have to hold the door on the Roswell case a little bit open. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we're going in the future, where we've been in the past, and some of the things that are of interest to me. Take a look at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and we will you'll be able to see more information about this, and take a look at the Roswell in the 21st century. And we will be back next week with an exciting guest, so you don't have to listen to me this long. So we will see you in 167 hours.